It's been a difficult time for a long time, actually, now for the high-end cinema market, specifically our industry. I mean, the pandemic actually was great for production. There was lots of production. We know that everybody, like 2 or 3 years ago, still people were basically in the high end, they were shooting all the time. Like, you know, there was a real shortage of crew, and more people actually got into the industry because of that at that time. And then it completely reversed when the strikes happened in Hollywood, and that affected especially high-end production to this day. Writer strikes, actress strikes, and it never recovered to where it was. And now, of course, I mean, we've seen that there were a lot of pre-orders for the Alexa 35 from everybody. Like
when the camera came out. Again, it was a significant move from ARRI, and many production houses wanted it, and rental houses.
It was 2.5 years ago. That was exactly when we were really at the peak of this production craziness. And we, you know, like we know that they were overwhelmed with pre-orders and people had to wait for a very long time for the camera. But then exactly when they were starting to finally be able to ship, to ship in quantities, that's exactly when the strikes hit. And so it was like kind of the worst timing. And I think people shouldn't forget that ARRI isn't a huge company, you know, like they are huge in high-end cinema, but in terms of volume, in terms of units sold, because it's such a high-priced item, it's really targeted. They only have high-end cameras, so that immediately hit them when pre-orders were canceled. And I can only imagine. Of course, we don't know for sure, but I can only imagine that they probably ended up with a lot of stock that was sitting on the shelves.
Assumption,
you know, like, but I
based
think
on the industry,
exactly. So they probably had a lot of stock that now was a bit harder to get rid of.
What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino Leitner and Johnny Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Hi everybody, this is CineD Focus Check episode 49. Hi Johnny.
Hello Nino, how are you?
I am good, and this week we are talking about
so many things. I mean, there's a new Alexa 35 base model.
The budget one that you're going to buy, right?
I'm going to buy 2, but we'll talk about this.
So a couple of different subjects. I mean, the not new Alexa 35 base model that we're going to talk about.
But we're going to talk about this seriously, no?
Yeah, of course. Then, I mean, you know, there's no major releases this week other than that, but we are going to talk about the new Zcam E2 Mark II.
Yeah, a lot of firmware updates in general.
Lots of firmware updates to cameras like the Burano, Sony Alpha cameras, LUMIX firmware updates. We're going to mention a new MZed course that we released recently. We will talk about the DZOFILM and Laowa probe lenses. So now, finally, Laowa is getting some competition.
That's your expertise.
Yes, and we're just going to talk about what that means. And they're actually going to be zoom probe lenses, which is nice. We'll mention the poll that we are running on EVF versus monitors, which is
so much fun, I tell you.
And a little bit about Adobe, Premiere, and After Effects updates. But let's dive right into the Alexa subject. So is the Alexa 35 base model the budget Alexa that you always wanted? Is now the time for you to buy an Alexa 35 and just, you know, like maybe 5 of them and just put them here in the studio, and it's, you know, the Alexa for the rest of us?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, there is a lot to talk about, because you can look at this new offering from ARRI in different aspects. So first of all, let's just explain the people what it is. Basically, what ARRI did, they took the Alexa 35 and put a new blue knob on it, so you know that this is the new base model. This is a camera that will be sold for a bit over 49,000 euro. And then on top, which is very clever, you can buy services. I mean, you can add... I mean, the camera itself will come with basic, let's say 4K, 16:9, 24 frames per second, maybe up to 60 frames per second.
Yeah, all the frame rates. I mean, normal frame rates, but up to 60.
Up to 60, and even ProRes. So this is all included in the base kit. And then if you want anything else, meaning open gate, anamorphic, higher frame rates like 120 frames per second.
Let's be specific with this. There's five upgrade licenses. Yeah. One is 120 frames per second for high frame rate shooting. That's a license that you can purchase or rent. There's one for ARRI RAW recording, which is not included by default, as it is with the standard Alexa 35, which is now called Alexa 35 Premium model. Yeah. There's the open gate anamorphic shooting and using the full 4.6K sensor open gate in all different resolutions and aspect ratios. You have to pay for that too as a separate license now in the base model. The pre-record feature, which is like 20 seconds of pre-recording for wildlife shooters specifically, of course, is an extra license. And the fifth one is this look feature, this in-camera ARRI looks textures, and you can purchase them individually.
Well, you can kind of rent them either on a weekly, monthly, yearly, or permanent basis, which is great. So the concept here is very, very nice. But the question is if this is a sign, and I want to start from the overall, let's say, is it a sign of kind of our industry is a bit...
let's talk about, just finish the features a little bit. I mean, what's interesting...
There's more features. Okay, I thought...
No, just so people, most people probably won't know how much an Alexa 35 is. The standard one was, or is, around 70,000 euros. And now you can get started with 50,000, but you're lacking those features. Now, if you buy those licenses, you can, like you said, you can rent them. Either weekly, annually, or
weekly, monthly.
Monthly, like 30 days, I think 7 days, or a full year. Then, of course, you pay a sum, but you can also permanently purchase them. And if you permanently purchase all 5 of them, you will pay exactly 20,000 euros, which is exactly the difference in price between this base and premium model. That's just important to point out, because if you decide, or if a rental house decides to buy this base model, they can still upgrade it to a premium model by purchasing all of the license permanently and will not end up paying more unless, of course, they decided to rent it in between for some project. So it's kind of smart in that way that you're not necessarily paying more if you purchase the licenses.
But who is it for? I mean, between us, if you are a rental house and you're already buying a camera, you probably want to offer it to your customers with a full ability and capacity, basically. Yeah. So if that's my main question here, if ARRI is offering this to rental houses more or independent shooters, because even for independent shooter to pay 50,000 for the base model,
Well, don't forget that buying or even renting features is not new for ARRI. They've had this before.
Of course.
The problem was that so far it was only possible to do by the owner of a camera. That meant essentially, because those are really rental items, this essentially pushed this responsibility to the rental house. So if you were to rent a camera and you needed a specific feature, for example, on a mirror, then you would have to request it, and then the rental house would have to purchase it or rent it. And that was complicated, because why would a rental house, that if it's a very specific feature that is never needed and they need it for one client, they will have to pay for it. What are they doing? They can't charge the full license fee if it's a permanent license to the person or company renting. So I think it makes sense. And now they're changing this. So now even anybody who uses the camera can rent. I think it makes a lot of sense for rental houses, because it would mean that I can buy a camera for 20,000 less as a rental house, and I can only upgrade it if I need it. And especially for feature films, those 30-day licenses, I think make a lot of sense. Like if you're a feature film production and you're shooting open gate, and first of all, for the rental house, it makes sense because you can offer the camera for less on a day rate, because it's based on this 50,000 price, the rental price now. And you are not the one who has to pay for the license for the open gate shooting, because the production company can do it themselves now. So, you are able to advertise your Alexa 35 for less money. Of course, you will have to tell them that this is an extra thing that you have to purchase, but it's possible. And it might be an easier way to, get the foot through the door with production companies if the day price is lower, even if at the end they will have to purchase that license. But it can be a temporary license for a 30-day or 60-day feature film shoot, and then it just reverts back to the normal if they don't need it on a permanent basis. So I think that makes sense also for rental houses.
So let's agree with her. First of all, this type of licensing is clever. Like that you really offer a base package in general, and then you can either purchase or rent other services for that camera upon your needs. I think maybe other manufacturers should consider something like this, because at the end it might lower the overall price of any camera. So this is clever. The thing is, again, $50,000 and I'm trying to understand I'm trying to understand what ARRI is trying to achieve here, because ARRI is very much trying to protect the second-hand market of their cameras. I mean, you hardly see any reductions. That's why they keep value over time, unlike other cameras in our industry. That's why they're actually not really cannibalizing their own prices with suddenly a big reduction or small reductions. So I'm trying to understand, why are they doing this? Let's start with the why. Is it a sign that not so many cameras are being sold in general? Does it mean that there is a really slowdown in production? And because of, it started in the pandemic, and then there were several strikes. And we know that our industry did not really recover from those strikes. Yeah. So is it a sign of innovation or a sign of something is not really working quite well and you have to find ways to push more cameras? What do you think?
For me, I think it's a very smart way of dropping a price of a camera without really dropping the price and upsetting your existing customers. I think that's very smart, because we've seen this with Red many times before. They've significantly reduced prices on their high-end cameras and any of their cameras several times, and it really upset the existing user base. I know people who got out of the Red game, many of them actually, who sold their entire Red cameras at some point because it didn't want to play this game anymore, because they also had a very loyal user base, or have. But I think it's been eroded, and it's been eroded partly because of very controversial decisions to significantly drop prices just in order to sell more, which is of course good for new customers, but in the end it completely devalues your investment. If you are buying something and the next day, I mean, sometimes it happened that they drop prices 30% on the next day, and you're stuck. If you just bought it, it will immediately affect your rental value of your camera, because you cannot argue a special rental price anymore, a higher rental price anymore, if the new camera is lower now. So that's very difficult. So I think on the surface, if somebody, just for anybody watching here who's kind of maybe starting out and, like this aspirational camera to have an Alexa and so on and whatever, I think people always just see this on the surface as it's just like, oh, they look at the price tag and it's like, oh, it's very high. Oh my God, I'm never going to afford it. This is crazy. I'm going to buy something else. Yes, but I think having a high price on cameras like this in a market that these cameras are targeted at, where you never, you're not working for yourself with a camera like this typically. This is always in a big environment of a crew. And even if you own it, you would rent this with yourself for a feature film or whatever production, serial production. It makes sense for this. If it's a tool that delivers, and arguably the Alexa 35 is such a tool, because we've seen in our lab test, it's been the absolute benchmark in latitude and dynamic range. It's far better than any other camera in the results, and nothing even came close so far. So if you have something like this as a manufacturer, you are able to ask for this premium price. It makes sense to in general, never cannibalize your own prices. That's just to this topic, yeah. But and it also it allows you to it is actually makes an easier decision to buy such a camera, because ARRI is not going to drop the price the next day. But in this way, they found a way to drop the price, and I think it's smart, because it's essentially the same hardware, right? We know that, like you said, it's been a difficult time for a long time, actually now, for the high-end cinema market, specifically our industry. I mean, the pandemic actually was great for production. There was lots of production. We know that everybody, like 2-3 years ago, still people were basically in the high end. They were shooting all the time. Like, there was a real shortage of crew, and more people actually got into the industry because of that at that time. And then it completely reversed when the strikes happened in Hollywood, and that affected especially high-end production to this day. Writer strikes, actor strikes, and it never recovered to where it was. And now, of course, I mean, we've seen that there were a lot of pre-orders for the Alexa 35 from everybody. Like
when the camera came out. Again, it was a significant move from ARRI, and many production houses wanted it, and rental houses.
It was 2.5 years ago. That was exactly when we were really at the peak of this production craziness. And they we know that they were overwhelmed with pre-orders, and people had to wait for a very long time for the camera. But then exactly when they were starting to finally be able to ship, to ship in quantities, that's exactly when the strikes hit. And so it was like kind of the worst timing. And I think people shouldn't forget that ARRI isn't a huge company. Like they are huge in high-end cinema, but in terms of volume, in terms of units sold, because it's such a high-priced item, it's really targeted. They only have high-end cameras, so that immediately hit them when pre-orders were canceled. And I can only imagine. Of course, we don't know for sure, but I can only imagine that they probably ended up with a lot of stock that was sitting on the shelves.
Assumption.
But I
based
think
on the industry,
exactly. So they probably had a lot of stock that now was a bit harder to get rid of, and as they didn't want to drop prices in order to not upset their existing customer base, this is a smart way of actually using
the cameras
that
went back to the workshop. They changed the knob, and now it's of course a new camera.
Now you have a blue knob on it. You change the firmware, and you introduce a whole new way of licensing to make it much more flexible.
Sure. The thing is that 50,000 euro is still 50,000 euro. So it's an investment. And the question is, based on how things are moving forward, how many people will want to do this investment? I mean, time will tell. We will see how successful or not this initiative. But I want to be a bit, like every business, and again, ARRI is a bit of an exception because, of course, they're targeting the high-end cinema. But every business should be built with this kind of triangle in mind, meaning something must be bring the money on the bottom, and then of course you can always introduce some equipment which is really expensive, but something, and also Red and others are always working the same way. We know Sony is working the same, and you need something to bring the money that allows more R&D, and then at the end, you on top of this, the pinnacle, you can introduce cameras that cost much more money. ARRI doesn't have this, so I just want to open here a conversation, and I'm very interested to hear what our audience will say if ARRI should introduce a model which is much more affordable, around $20,000, or if this is something that actually will help the company to bridge towards the future, or actually is going to cannibalize them. What do you think? And not like what we want. Of course, we would love to see this, but do you think that type of move to introduce an ARRI camera, which is around $20,000, based on this base model, would have been something that you think it's the right thing to do business-wise?
I think because they know how good the Alexa 35 is and how well it's received. I think right now, yes, of course, they have competition. They have Red on one hand, which is also used for a lot of high-end feature films, but to a much lesser degree, and then also to an even lesser degree, Sony Venice. And I think that's kind of it, right? There's not much else going on up there. In a way, they're competing with themselves. That's why if you just look at the top, whatever productions, there is not so many out there. People still don't know what's going to happen with Red. I think it's very much dependent. Do I want a cheaper ARRI? Yes, absolutely. Is it a smart business decision on their part? Probably not right now. I think it's something that I'm sure they talk about this all the time. And, it's always also a strategic decision. You can, of course, produce cameras for less money and then sell it for less money if you make more of them. If you make it more of a, we've seen, I mean, we've been invited to their headquarters. We've seen how they are built, hand built in Munich. They have a new headquarters since the last couple of years, and they have new production lines, but it's still very much hand built. Of course, they could decide to automate more of the processes and bring the price down if they wanted to. But right now, I think ARRI in the high end is competing with itself. The problem right now, and that's what I'm hearing from a lot of high-end DPs, is Alexa 35, yes, I want to shoot on it, but I had a hard time convincing the production company to actually rent that camera because it's also Super 35 and the Mini was enough, right? The Alexa Mini was enough, the normal Mini, not even the LF. And that's what it's competing with, right? But now with this new pricing structure, that might open it up for, might make it easier for that camera to kind of replace the Mini in a lot of productions, which is a great camera still with a 12, 13, 14-year-old whatever LF3 sensor, which is still good enough for so many productions. So yeah, I think a cheaper ARRI camera, of course, would have to. They would give up a lot of their high-end business, I think, because if you look at just on a spec level, of course, none of the ARRI cameras can actually do much more than the competitors, right? If you just look at
specifications,
yeah. I mean, you have open gate shooting with LUMIX cameras that cost a fraction, that use probably a Sony sensor, we don't know, but something. You have even now, of course, higher resolutions and stuff like that. But then the one thing that sets ARRI apart is the Alexa look, but also the dynamic range and the latitude.
There's so many other things. I'm just saying that for now, the company is targeting mostly rental houses. I hope that in the future, they will find a reason to also target end users with a much more comfortable price. I know, of course, it's all a matter of how the industry will move forward, because if less things will be produced at the end of the day, or other cameras will be rented instead of the ARRI might feel the flame, and that will move them towards finding new ways to make money. They will have to. They will be forced to. So,
I don't know. I don't see them to be forced to do anything, to be honest.
I see to earn money. So I'm trying to look at the move they made right now, and this is a move in order to earn more.
But what move do you think, in which way could there be a less expensive ARRI camera that would not upset everybody who has an ARRI camera?
That's a very good question, of course. And it's not that I have the answer out of the sleeve, because this is something that a company definitely have to think about, how to do this, how to differentiate between cameras that goes to rental houses and high-end productions, and cameras that can be used by end users, still having the color science and the ARRI service and the ARRI reliability, and bring some of those elements that, because you know what, every business is trying to start with newbies in a way. Yeah? They want people to grow within the system. And we see this. Many companies are introducing entry-level cameras, hoping when they will grow up, they will continue to use their own systems. We can see this with Blackmagic Designs. We can see this with Sony. We can see this with others. ARRI doesn't have this, in the sense that there is no really catering to the younger generation. It's either if you are DP and you are, you grow up in other ecosystems, and then you probably.
But why not? I mean, you don't need to own a camera. I mean, why do, as a young DP, of course you can shoot with an Alexa. It's not.
I know, but you will always rely on renting the stuff.
Yeah, but so, the kind of productions that are using those cameras.
Sure, but I'm saying, and I'm opening this for discussion. It's not. I'm just asking if that would be more useful for the company in general to think about a $20,000 version. Find a smart way to do this so the end user can also buy that camera and grew up into the system. It's an open discussion, and I'll be very happy to hear what you guys saying. Maybe I get it completely wrong, and ARRI is doing really well. But we've been in this business already. We saw how well Nokia did. We saw how well so many other companies did, and then the market simply moved to a different.
I think I mean I talked to them about this before many times actually, and when new cameras came out, and the answer was always, we don't even have, like, we wouldn't even know how to mass market, like how to mass make a camera. We're not set up for this, right? It's really not set up for this. If they decided to do this, it wouldn't only be a matter of producing more, but also just making it happen and actually having the ability to make more, because they're really not set up for this, right? It takes a lot of time to make one of those cameras right now. And I think they would have to completely reconsider their manufacturing process.
For sure.
And that's something that cannot be done within a year or two even.
Sure.
It's of course on the other hand, like it's almost like asking for a budget Ferrari, like what would you still want to drive one if it was cheap, because it's not setting you apart anymore, but of course it's a bit of a prestige thing too, in order to be able to shoot on a Alexa camera, but I think as long as the quality is so much better or differentiated from others, it's easy to argue, like, because you mentioned Nokia and others. I mean, with Nokia, for example, they just completely fell back with innovation and, said like they were riding a dead horse for way too long, or BlackBerry or all those companies. And I haven't seen that point in time for ARRI, not at all. I mean, in terms of course, I mean, there should be some more innovations maybe in some fields, maybe also, like features like autofocus and so on should be taken more seriously also in this high end, because there are definitely applications even in the high end where we want to use autofocus, even in documentary or whatever. And that's not there yet. But on the other hand, they have the best sensor. Everybody's saying they have the best sensor. Every test confirms they have the best sensor. As long as that is the case, if that changes, sure. I mean, if that ever changes,
Nino, we also know about a company that had the best AI, and suddenly from one day to another, suddenly there was another AI model which is much cheaper and not at least as good as. But anyway, it's an open discussion. I'm very happy to hear our audience if they would like to see a more cost-effective ARRI camera, and if yes, I mean, don't say yes or no. I mean, why? That's it's just interesting to think about it.
What I find, by the way, funny about, they also, like Codex introduced a new drive. It's called Codex Compact Express Drive now. So just to remind you, the existing one is around 1,800 euros for 1 terabyte and is able to record ARRI RAW. The new one is like 40% less and only records ProRes, but specs-wise, it's the same read and write speed. So I wonder if it's actually also the same hardware. That's maybe, but if it has the same read and write speed, I wouldn't know where the difference was. But
maybe it's a matter of, again, software.
Yeah,
that can
it's kind of weird if it's just a limitation. I mean, the only differentiating look is now it has a white ring as opposed to an orange ring.
So it's about a bit over 800 euro for 1 terabyte, which again, it's a matter of question. Like, the other solutions.
We know that we know that now CF Express Type B cards would be fast enough to support, I think, even the ARRI RAW. If I'm not mistaken,
this version 4 for those CF Express
cards
might
and I think
do the job here. No camera in the market is still recording in this format, but when it comes, we will see.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that would also make on-set usage, because I know from productions that it's very often the case that like there's not enough drives on a set, and then just the DIT is handling too much in a short amount of time.
Yeah, this will give up to 2.5 hours filming in 4K, ProRes, 16:9, 24 frames per second.
We'll be back after this message from our sponsor.
1-minute tips by Fujifilm and CineD. Let's discuss more handheld tactics. If you're out in the field, oftentimes you're on the move, so carrying a heavy rig will start to impact your stamina and your stability when operating. How do we cut down on weight? Well, start from your camera body and glass. Are they doing what they need to be doing? Are you able to swap them out for lighter options and still get a similar result that you can work with and move with? Or, if you have a clear vision and are absolutely set on that combination, no worries. Let's start moving to the accessories and support. Can you swap to lighter batteries? Are you using a lightweight monitor? What about the weight of your matte box or handles? Check your mounting points. Is there extra metal that can be reduced or taken off, such as rods or base plates? Or even replacing articulating arms with single pivot points? Every little bit helps. The flip side is, if you have too little weight, you'll have more transfer of kinetic energy, so all the little bumps and jolts will become more prominent. Keep checking and comparing your setup and find the right balance for you. 1-minute tips. Until next time.
And now back to the show.
Good. Shall we move on, Nino?
Yeah, so that's the Alexa 35 base model. And just let us know. And please also give us feedback to podcast@cined.com. You know, if you have any comment on that subject in general or any of the subjects, we're always reading and we always want to discuss those things. Just one last thing I want to mention. We had two quite interesting comments here. Somebody commented, James Sigmund commented on the article, it's clear that ARRI didn't design this as a low-cost ARRI 35 aimed at rental houses. However, given the current state of the indie film industry, which seems to be dwindling towards death, well, that's kind of dark.
That's harsh, yeah.
I can't imagine many owner-operators spending over $50,000 on a significantly limited Super 35 camera. The licensing options available are also not feasible for most productions, as they often can't afford the added expense. I doubt that, to be honest. I mean, somebody also commented on that because some of the licenses are like $300 for a week or two. So I don't see this as a huge, if it's a temporary license, as a huge stopping point. But anyway. But that's interesting. I sold my Alexa 35 with all licenses in December 23 for nearly 26% less than what I paid for it only a few months earlier, because the market in LA flatlined. Both rentals and productions have not really recovered since the strike. Yeah, Well,
James, thank you. In a way, he's backing up part of the conversation here.
Yeah. And... yeah, but also reply of Sight Sound. When one purchases a camera package such as this, it is because it's not ubiquitous, like I said, and it's out of reach for most to own. Owners rent it with or without their labor. So long as there is production demand for the product, the higher price can be a competitive advantage.
But that's exactly what we also talked about. But
yeah.
Let's see, a year from now, we're going to sit here in episode 222 and see where the market is and how this initiative was actually received. It's quite easy to find out from rental houses and even users if they voted to go to this type of...
It's a good point, actually. Let's ask. I'll also reach out to a couple of rental houses just to hear their existing Alexa 35 owners, to hear their opinion as well. Just one thing to point out in between subjects, I just want to mention to our audience that we always appreciate people using our B&H and CVP buy links on the website. We are, you're watching this for free. We live from sponsors. We need to feed the people behind the camera and the writing desks and the programmers as well. So we always appreciate if you are in the market to buy any type of gear from B&H or CVP, please use our links on the website. We really appreciate it. We get a very small commission, and it doesn't cost you a dime more. And we just added on the sidebar of the desktop side, we just added a permanent link to the deal zone on B&H, and they have really, really good daily deals that we sometimes highlight in separate articles. But if you click that link in the sidebar, you will be taken through our affiliate link to the B&H deal zone, and they have a lot of 24-hour deals that, very good savings.
Attractive things. I mean, sometimes I'm jealous that we don't live in the US, huh? It's like...
Yeah, some prices are amazing. I mean, there's Quasar Science, double rainbow linear LED light, saving of $900 just for 24 hours.
Yeah.
There's stuff like that all the time. So they do a good job actually providing good value. again, doesn't cost you a dime more. We appreciate if you can use the links. It helps us keep the lights, everything running here over at CineD. All right, let's move on to the other new camera announcement this week, which is the Zcam E2 Mark II series of cameras. Now, Johnny, you're experienced with reviewing them in the past, the Zcams. It's been a while, though, I think.
It has been such a long time. And in all honesty, the company itself is a bit of a mystery for me in general, because the people behind seems to be extremely nice. But then we hear about announcements or camera that are supposed to come to the market, and then global shutter and so on, and then it's very hard to find those cameras or follow up if they really saw the light of day. But and we know from the owners of the company that those cameras are being used on film sets, and also in the Olympic Games in Paris. They sold hundreds of those. I don't know if you remember, but maybe you saw sometimes there was literally you could see like in Matrix,
like a bullet time rig.
Exactly, and that was many of those things were done with Zcam cameras. So it seems like, in a way, they're very strong in the industry, but when it comes to end users, we don't hear so much about them.
Maybe they're very good at selling for those bigger productions,
maybe,
because I know they have a very good way of syncing those cameras now, and I guess that's what one niche that they found, and also live streaming. I think they're very small, so I'm a bit confused by the naming. So Zcam E2.
E2 is a series of cameras.
It's a series, but there is a full frame version, there's a Super 35 version, and a Micro Four Thirds version.
Exactly.
And now all three of those were upgraded to a Mark II. Now, let's just go through the specs real quick here.
I don't want to go into individual specs, because the specs themselves, in terms of resolution, recording, that's all the same. It's more about, let's call it maybe, the usability of the camera has been upgraded. So let's start with even the recording media. Now it's CF Express Type B card instead of the old CFast, for example.
Nice.
There's a gen lock. There is a built-in gyroscope sensor, BNC connector, 3D SDI plus HDMI, unlike before.
It was HDMI only before.
That's right. So those things. Even the type of battery, now it's a mini V-Lock battery plate on the camera
instead of NPF. Nice.
That's right. So all of those little things maybe are enough to call the camera like a Mark II.
Well, I think it's some things are quite significant. I mean, just the connectivity. I mean, having SDI, of course.
Of course. I mean, again, that justifies the Mark II stuff. So it's nice to see that they are moving forward and thinking how to do stuff, but I think in terms of resolutions and frame rates and everything behind that's all.
But they are capable. I mean, even if the Mark I already did some of the stuff,
exactly.
But having 6K up to 60 frames per second in the Super 35 one, and then you can go up to 100 frames in 4K. So that's The only thing is. And I think also many people commented on our news article that when it comes to H.264 and H.265 recording, it is 10-bit, but it's still 420 color space. Okay. And I think many people would appreciate. And actually, this is one of the things to ask next time when we see them. The dear people behind the camera, to ask why that specific thing was not updated. I don't know how many people, if at all, are really using with that particular camera H.265 and H.264. But if you already have it and the camera is capable, maybe it's a matter of hardware limitation. I don't know. And it would have been nice if that could do 422. What I can really recommend, if people are interested in learning and just being in touch with people who own this camera, of course it's a niche, but the Facebook group is really good. The Zcam Facebook group, and Kinzon, the owner of the company, is very active there too.
He's amazing. He's such a nice person.
Yeah, and it's just this group is great. People are asking questions. I mean, in general, the only thing that, in my opinion, Facebook is still useful for are those niche groups, especially around cameras. And this is a good example where there's a lot of good stuff going on there. Yeah. So, So we haven't touched the cameras, but there are new versions now there. Now, we have to point out pricing is very, very attractive. I mean, they are starting the Micro Four Thirds version, the E2 M4 Mark II, is $2,000. Then the Super 35 version, the E2S6 Mark II, is $2,500, and the full frame version is $3,500.
Very fair prices, very compact, small camera.
Yeah.
And actually, we know that people who are using those really love them. And I would really like you guys, if any of you is using any of the ZCam cameras, please share with us. We are happy to hear more about the company. Again, they are very strong when it's B2B, like business to business. But when it's B2C, like business to consumer, I think maybe sometimes, okay, the forum is nice, or the group, the user group is great, but somehow it's very quiet from them.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's quiet also about Kinefinity, right? It's like all of those niche players that do great cameras don't have an easy life. Let's put it that way.
I don't know.
In a shrinking camera market. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Let's move on to a couple of firmware updates for different cameras. Now, the Sony Burano, finally, we had the announcement of the version 2 firmware. Now, this is something that people have been waiting for, because a lot of functions that people have been waiting for have now been announced and will be out very soon, I think in March.
March 2025. This year, 2025. Of course, this year.
I think it's this year, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's next year, because Sony does that sometimes.
There's a roadmap, different stuff up until 2026, if you remember. But this particular 2.0 firmware update will come.
So they're adding a couple of readout modes to the sensor, which are quite useful. A 3.8K full frame crop with up to 120 frames per second, which is one of the points of criticism, that this camera didn't have a very high frame rate. Now, I mean, I always find it a little bit ironic when some company writes full frame crop, because, it's like black milk. It's like, it's either full frame or it's not. But, it's a crop in full frame. And it's close to full frame, but it's still a crop. And it's 120 frames per second, but it can use almost the entire sensor, and it can record then in XAVC and XOCN, which is great, of course. So you have finally that mode. To be fair, there's other Sony Alpha cameras that have 4K 120 at XAVC,
many of them, yeah.
But they never really say that most of those modes are actually cropping. Like, even if you use a A7S III or FX3, people just sometimes think it's a full frame sensor, but if you look very closely, it's actually cropping. They just don't communicate that a lot on the lower end cameras, and they do, thankfully, on the high end camera on the Burano. Now, there's a 4.3K 4x3 mode, anamorphic, with up to 60 frames per second. That's great too, of course. So you can now have it's not open gate, but you have a really 4x3 mode with 60 frames per second. You can do some slow motion in Super 35, and with Super 35 covering anamorphics as well. Okay, there's a new 1.9K 16:9 mode, which actually for me sounds like full HD, right? 1.9K with up to 240 frames per second, Super 35, but only in XAVC. But at least it's there now. You can do a 10 times slow motion if you shoot at 24 frames per second. There's 24 frames per second to XOCN 16:9 imager modes, whatever that means.
In full HD, I guess.
Yeah. I guess.
Okay. I mean, there's so many other enhancements. Maybe we'll just go through the list and pick up the
it's
most
good.
significant.
There's additional high frame rate modes, some specific ones. Proxy recording for 24 frames per second recording formats, which is very useful. 1.8 times D-squeeze setting for anamorphic lenses. Now, again, this is one thing where we've seen with Sony before, they make a big fuss about adding one D-squeeze mode. I don't understand why they just simply can do all the necessary D-squeeze mode and deliver the cameras with them in the beginning.
I guess it's a technical challenge. I mean, I don't think that they don't do this because they don't want to, but obviously it's a technical challenge.
It's just weird for me because
underestimating this. I don't know.
Well, if you use an external monitor from Small HD or port keys or whatever, you will always have all of those D-squeeze modes built in. So I don't think it's just a viewing setting in your monitor. So I don't understand. But anyway, it would be nice to have those things by default in new cameras in the future, in all their new cameras. New exposure tools, which I think is a big thing because people like the ones that are in the Venice, and also better plus support for active high image stabilization in full frame crop 6K. I think the image stabilization of that sensor was not available in all modes before. Better autofocus in different modes, a standardized SDI output. We saw a comment on that article that somebody's really excited about that. So now you have that's of course good, because so far when you changed recording modes, sometimes the SDI output wouldn't work anymore. That's troubling if you work on a set. Now it seems to be more consistent. So a lot of new stuff.
Those are the main things. Yeah,
those are the main things. It should be out for free for Burano owners in March.
Yeah. And again, it's nice to see that Sony is also trying to protect investment of people. At the end of the day, this camera is around $25,000.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious to know what will come after that.
Well, I guess that will stay in the market for a bit. Well, now we talked about it on our...
We are running out of Italian islands or what?
If you missed our last episode where we talked about camera predictions, like we had a big section talking about Sony camera predictions for 2025, and our big hope is to see successors in the FX line, specifically FX9, FX6, maybe FX3, which are really, especially the FX9 and also to a lesser degree the FX6, are really due to be replaced with a new version at some point. So we hope to see new versions of those cameras this year. Okay, firmware updates to the Alpha 1, Alpha 1 Mark II, and Alpha 9 Mark III. Now, those are smaller updates. It's nice to see them getting some love, where we've seen, I think Sony is starting to listen more to people complaining about buying a high-end model of their cameras, and then there's a lower-end model released, which sometimes has more features. Actually, we got one of the comments on the Burano update as well that even those different imager modes are not in the Venice 2. So now the Burano has it. But the same thing happens with the Alpha cameras sometimes as well. But now at least they're giving more functions also to the now already not so new anymore Alpha 1 Mark 1. And very small stuff, actually. Nothing major. One of the bigger things is this support for the C2PA authentication.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives authenticity to images that they're actually originated from a camera, which is important, of course, for photographers, specifically news photographers, to have supply authentication that their image was actually taken with a camera and not AI generated or altered. So that's a big thing. A lot of small stuff in these firmware updates, nothing major, nothing that really changes your functionality of those cameras, especially in video modes. But it's nice to see that they're getting some love with updates. And then also we've had a firmware update series for LUMIX cameras.
This is more significant, basically. And I want to exclude, there was an update for the S5 II, S5 IIX, GH7, G9 II, S1, and S1R. I want to exclude the S1R and S1 because those are really older cameras, and this is more the firmware update. It just allows the cameras to work with some of the newer zoom lens in a better way. But the most significant thing is, of course, the newer cameras, and it's really nice to see some of the functionality that is coming. Me personally, I'm really, especially the S5 II and S5 IIX, because we have 6K sensor in those ones. So what LUMIX is kind of giving us now is what they call hybrid and crop zoom features. Those are two different ways to do kind of a digital zoom, like crop into the image but still retain the quality. And I think from samples that I saw, it looks good. Yeah,
I think it's what Sony calls clear image zoom. Probably
can be,
same thing.
This is like when you shoot in 4K, you still have the capacity to do this. So obviously with the same lens, you can do much more. It doesn't matter if it's a zoom lens or a fixed focal length. The other thing that they give us is like a MP4 Lite codec, which is also very nice. Because now you can shoot in around 60 megabit per second, and of course, if you need to deliver fast or upload stuff or whatever, you can do this at a friction of a
50 megabits per second.
50, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lower quality. I think that was one thing that was missing. We've seen this, that it was quite heavy, the files that you get out of these cameras, and now it's
and another
the lower bitrate
exciting
version.
feature, or two exciting features that I'm personally excited about. The first of all is the multiple frame marker display, and you can now display up to 3 different ones, so you can look and see a 16:9, 9:16, for example. That's very useful when you're shooting on open gate, because we know that Panasonic is really good with giving open gate to micro four third and full frame cameras. So you can really plan your frame according to what you might edit later. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's for social media or for 16:9 or whatever. So this is really a nice feature that you can see those coming in different colors, so it's easy to see them. And there's also enhanced subject detections. Now you have aeroplanes and trains, and for me, this is very much a Japanese thing, because of course in Japan trains are really, really, it's part of the culture almost. Yeah,
to film trains
also. But now the autofocus is obviously has a dedicated subject detections for trains, for example.
I always wonder, I mean, those functions are great to have, like also animal and human detection. Every time I need autofocus, I rarely am present enough while I'm shooting. It's like to change something in the menu, to change like to a specific type of thing I need to focus on.
That's a very good point. And actually Fujifilm has already like an intelligent mode that can detect automatically what you're filming.
Yeah,
because that's the way it should be at the
exactly.
end. You should be able to the camera should know, if it's already so smart, you sometimes simply don't have the time to change in the menu your autofocus detection mode. So
maybe it could be changed with a tap, like you tap on the thing.
Why at all?
No, because if you have a train, a person and a dog in the same shot, how would it know what to focus on? Can I just tap on it? And then it switches? No?
Yeah, okay, Nino. Okay, good. You rest your case. Okay, but anyway, this is so please look at our article, because most of the cameras are getting the same things. Maybe there's some.
So not just the full frame ones, but also the GH7
exactly.
GH7 and G9 too are getting, most of the same things.
Exactly, the enhanced subject detection, multiple frame marker, and so on. So just look and see what. It's good to update. I'm sure you'll find a lot of usability here.
And it's already available free of charge from the Panasonic support website.
That's right.
Okay, so I think that rounds off the firmware updates.
I tell you, that's crazy, huh?
All right, next up, let me just highlight a new MZed course that we recently released. It's a very short course by one of our most prolific MZed creators, Ollie Kensington. Ollie is a filmmaker, I would call him, because he's very
he's
broad.
A Swiss Army knife,
he's a very, very good colorist, very experienced colorist, and we have a lot of Da Vinci related courses on MZed from him. Very, very much in depth, like they're many, many hours long. So if you want to learn Da Vinci from scratch, that's the perfect course, the beginner's course for Da Vinci Resolve, which is like 6 or 7 hours long. And then there's a couple others which are focusing on grading and different aspects of Da Vinci Resolve. But he's also a director and producer, and he's very experienced on set as well. So one new course that we launched with him is called, it's a very simple course in terms of the subject. It's Introduction to Video Lighting. It's an easy way for people who are probably not as experienced to get some really, really hands-on experience from somebody who's shooting a lot on how to craft beautiful images with little means, I would say. This is not about a big production. This is more like, how do I make an interview look great? How do I make products or, even physical things make great? And how do I make them three-dimensional with lighting? And this is just over an hour long, 1.5 hours, something like that. Very short course. This was done in cooperation with CVP in the UK. And I just recommend everybody to watch that course. It's part of the MZed Pro subscription. So if you are a monthly subscriber, which starts at $49, or an annual subscriber, which is $349, you can just watch it if you're already a subscriber, or you can also purchase the course individually for $29. It's a very, very nice one because he's really interacting with the people and just showing off how you can craft specifically, how you can make a mood even in a adverse environment. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you're forced to shoot in an environment which is not pretty, and you're supposed to make light something in a pretty way, and that's exactly what he shows here with a lot of very good examples.
When you're a documentary filmmaker, you know exactly what Nino is talking about.
Exactly. So that course is now available on MZed. It's called Introduction to Video Lighting, and you can check it out now. We have an article on the course on CineD.com. And again, you can watch it on MZed. Good. Let's move on to a different piece of news. Now, Adobe just added, it's two pieces of Adobe news. First of all, in the beta version of Premiere, they finally, and we only found out by reading something in an Adobe forum where a developer actually said, Adobe developer, that now they finally added Canon Cinema Raw Lite hardware acceleration to Premiere Pro, After Effects, and Media Encoder. This is significant because, of course, it means that it will cut down your render time significantly. So if you are working with Canon Cinema Raw Lite, you might want to upgrade to that beta version of Premiere or After Effects if you're working with these softwares, because it will cut down render times about 10 times. If you are using supported hardware. The supported hardware right now seems to be only Intel M-based Apple computers. So if you're an Intel-based Mac, you're probably out of luck. But it seems to be the case that some kind of hardware acceleration on the M chip series from Apple can be utilized for Cinema Raw Lite decoding and encoding. So that's why it makes sense. So if you are using any of the recent Canon cinema cameras with that raw codec and you're using Premiere, it makes sense for you to use that beta. It's not in the final version of Premiere yet.
Okay, and the other enhancement is actually everything to do with captions and translations.
Yeah, that's a different thing. That is the actual update to Premiere and After Effects. So there were upgrades to Premiere that are, I don't know if they're already available. They might already be available, but I haven't upgraded my versions yet. But there's a couple cool additions. So first of all, they now use, finally, I think, AI is analyzing your footage and automatically creating tags, meaning it's much easier to search for stuff in your media bin, especially if you're shooting documentaries or something with a lot of footage.
Interesting. That's what Strada tried to do also with their own.
Yeah, I mean, it was only a matter of time until this ends up in all kinds of NLEs. But it's basically analyzing your footage now. And in this example, you see that, like you just put red canoe at dawn, and it will show you the footage that has a red canoe at dawn. And of course, has to be tested how well it works. But I think it's even useful if even if you're just putting wide shot outdoors, stuff like that. Sometimes if you're editing your own stuff or the footage that you're editing and we all know how frustrating it is to look for that specific clip, and either with thumbnails or just a list, if hardly anybody takes the time to properly name their footage in editing, right? We usually just have the random names. And we don't actually name them properly, but now you can search for stuff like that.
I'm still waiting for the killer feature. You know what it is? Edit my family videos.
As often you've mentioned that, in the meantime, you could have edited it. So,
I tell you.
But yeah, I mean, this is a very useful thing.
For sure.
I think that if it works well for, if you're in a project, I think that's for me, one of the most frustrating parts about editing is this beginning, just before you end up with a first assembly edit, like just even selecting the best shot of something, that always just hate it. And, if tools like this help with organizing in the beforehand, just making me get to that point quicker, very welcome.
But that's because you're always filming only best shots. I mean, I solved the issue for myself. I just shoot one good shot and the rest is lousy.
Well,
and
the
then
trick is always to
one.
look at the last shot first, right? But it's still, it's like endless. Anyway.
No, but that's good. But the other feature actually is something that I might use a lot because we're doing a lot of videos in Japanese, like a lot of the mini documentaries when we review cameras. And now everything that has to do with captions and translation might be much easier.
Yeah. So the captions can be automatically translated now into 17 different languages. Now, of course, I'm sure this is also machine learning based, and those translations are not perfect. I actually tested the auto caption feature on Final Cut on the new version, Final Cut 11, and it worked surprisingly well in terms of even recognizing words like CineD and writing them correctly. And then I just copied whatever I got from Final Cut, exported it, threw it into ChatGPT, and asked it to correct that. And then went back with the time codes and put that on YouTube, and it was almost perfect.
But how did you verify?
I read it through. I mean, I literally read.
You're talking about captions now, not translation.
No, this was just captions. This was just captions because I mean, we're starting. No, you're starting. Well, I did auto translation too, and then I had our Spanish editor, our Spanish language editor, who's working on our Spanish website and doing a lot of our editing, verified, and there were still mistakes there. Of course, that was with automatic translation using an AI tool. So I mean, there is still human intervention needed, and actually, we talked about this before that we see more and more online. You see lots more captions now available for different videos, also on YouTube. But there are sometimes there's still glaring mistakes in there because, of course, it's not everything can be done automatically. So, yeah, there's still, I think, always a human should look over that stuff.
Exactly, just to monitor what was done, the output.
But you need the native speaker for that in order to do that. But at least,
but
now
not
you
for
can...
the captions, by the way. The captions, if you do it in your own language, then it's easy. I mean, I remember still the time that there was a job in our industry to transcribe everything, and it took hours. And I felt always very sorry for the people who are...
It still is a big job, but it's, of course, shrinking by the day because those tools get better and better. And now even... Yeah, you start with an automatic and the cool thing is the automatic caption thing. It just gives you the time codes. Everything is there. You can export in every format that you need, and then import the captions in YouTube and just have all the different versions there.
Which I always, I mean, if you're doing stuff for YouTube, uploading stuff, I always prefer not to burn the captions into the video, because if there is a mistake,
of course,
it's especially on YouTube, unlike Vimeo, you cannot change the video. But if you just edit to YouTube as another layer, that's easy, always very easy to fix.
I mean, we see a lot of big YouTubers also do even supply. I think it's a feature that's now rolling out to more and more YouTube creators too, to even have dubbed versions of their videos. Unfortunately, this is not available for everybody yet, but I saw Mr. Beast, they are dubbing every video in different languages, which of course gives the video a lot bigger reach possibility. So I'm looking forward, this is something we also might experiment with, and we're already looking into for our MZed courses to translate into different languages. Yeah. Okay. So that's and then After Effects also gets faster playback and HDR support. It's been a couple of years since I really worked with After Effects, but it's always been extremely slow when it comes to playback. I wonder if it got better in the meantime, but it's nice to see that it now has faster playbacks and that it gets HDR support. And also they added Frame.io native camera support to camera to cloud support for the C400 and C80. We know those cameras have those features, and now it's also built into, of course, Frame.io being owned by Adobe is now built into these new versions of the software. So nice updates from Premiere. I mean, fair point of criticism from our editor Dave here in this article that, of course, I mean, cost is always a factor with Adobe. A lot of those functions, especially the caption stuff, you get also in DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut, both of which are one-time purchases, never have to pay again for those softwares, whereas Adobe is a monthly subscription, and like if you do the math, it's a lot of money over time. So I
wish I was strong enough divert to DaVinci Resolve. The thing is that when you start a project, I always go to the known and not to the unknown, because in that regard, it's time.
Yeah, that's why I go to Final Cut and I like it.
Easier. And,
and you go to Premiere.
But, we do, I think both of us are doing more and more in DaVinci Resolve, small stuff.
Yeah.
Transcoding, exporting. So we're starting. Maybe one day, just before I retire, I will find.
Well, I edited the last 2 episodes of this podcast myself because Felix was in Mexico. I'm so happy you're back. Thank you. And I got more used to editing in DaVinci, and it has some weird. At least, like you're deleting, for example, you're muting a audio track. And suddenly when you start playing back, it only plays audio from one side. And you're like, why? And it's these small things that still seem like bugs in editing.
But it's a feature?
No, it was a bug. It's very basic stuff. I'm not doing any detailed editing here. Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, I wouldn't have that in Final Cut, stuff like that. But it's the same with every piece of software. And the problem with Adobe is, and Dave points that out, is always stability.
I don't see this. That's very interesting.
Not anymore, maybe, but he's a professional editor and he still suffers from stability issues.
I'm very, very interested to actually have to ask him, because that was, of course, like stability. It was. But I wonder if that's more on Windows-based machines or like Intel-based, or it's really because on what we have now.
I think the problem is if you are a company like Adobe and you're so much dependent on keeping your subscribers, there is, of course, a tendency to add a lot of features frequently just to keep people happy, and maybe not do too much bug fixing in terms of I always in the past had the feeling that Adobe added a lot of things, but very quickly, but it took them much longer to fix glaring bugs that were there for a very long time. And I think that's still the case in some ways. And that's unfortunate, of course. But that's what happens if you want to motivate new people to subscribe, I guess. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Canon announced a new RF zoom lens, the 16-28 f2.8 lens. Full frame. Now, we've mentioned this many times before that, Canon in the full frame RF world, there's only Canon.
Only Canon.
Yes, only Canon. They're not allowing so far other manufacturers to make full frame RF lenses. And they were always very good lenses, but quite heavy and big sometimes. If you look at their standard zooms and so on, I think they got the message. Now,
this is different.
This is a smaller version. It's also, I think the price is right. It's around $1,150 on B&H right now.
And it's less than 500 grams. So it's very lightweight.
Yeah, 16-28 is a nice wide zoom range for full frame, of course.
I think for run and gun, it's really perfect when you think about it.
The price is right. Seems like a very good addition. I'm sure image stabilization is very good. Sure, autofocus is very good as usual with these lenses, and it's good that they're adding more affordable but also lighter lenses in this standard. I think that's one of the biggest, and we mentioned this in our camera predictions video last week, the podcast. That basically, I think one of the biggest issues that Canon has right now, they have great cameras, but the lens choice in the RF is much more limited than it is, for example, for E-mount or even L-mount. So there's still some catching up to do, and hopefully they will also allow third-party lenses to be made for RF full frame at some point. Good.
Last thing.
Last but not least, well, actually, no, we have a few more things. I forgot.
What?
We also have the Laowa.
Really?
Laowa zooms.
Okay, so let's quickly talk about the Laowa because it's another piece of equipment.
So we recently saw the announcement of new probe lenses. Now, the original Laowa probe lens was, announced almost 10 years ago or something.
2015.
I think our still to date most successful YouTube video was one from Photokina, where we actually filmed that lens because we thought, it was cool.
Photokina.
I think I remember at that trade show, we did like 5 different videos of Laowa products, and one of them was about this snorkel lens, which at the time nobody knew about. And I guess we just discovered it there. And that's why the video became kind of viral with 2 or 3 million views, because it was just an odd thing to look at.
It looks different. It was all about new and innovation. Yeah.
And yeah, it's a macro lens with a very, very long barrel that you can move very close to subjects, and it's relatively wide angle. It's 24 millimeters. So you have this macro wide angle lens, which is very unusual. So you can literally do close up of an ant or a bug or a flower without casting a shadow onto it, and have a wide angle look, which is something unique for a macro lens.
Yeah, it's very strong.
Because usually, you know how macro lenses are very often 100 millimeter or 50 millimeter, so quite telephoto, and have this typical compression of the image in the background, so you don't actually see the background. With a 24 mil, you see the background, and you can move close to it, and you can also move it through some small stuff.
A slice of pizza?
Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That I actually did for the reviews. I when I reviewed, I think the first version, I did the beehive. No, I was filming inside a beehive. You know, stuff like that you can only do with a lens like that. And the original Laowa probe, and also the second version, the Pro Tube, became very, very common. And also even in high-end shooting, like you see these lenses everywhere, became very, very popular for those specific shots.
So what is
the funny thing
here?
is, Laowa was alone in this field. There was no, I mean, there is a Californian company that makes some probe lenses, but nothing there was any mass product like the probe lens. But now we have DZOFILM, another Chinese manufacturer, who just announced a competitor to the Laowa probe lens, and it's called X-Tract probe lens. Now, what's special about it?
What is the twist?
It's a zoom, and it's they call it, I think it's a 2.3 time. No, this is an 18 to 28 millimeter T8 zoom. Now, T8 sounds really slow, but they're all very slow, because the original probe was T16. So this is already twice as fast. So actually, no, that should be more. Should be
much more
actually.
I'm actually surprised that this is T28.
T8.
You said T28.
No, T8.
Good.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
It's impossible to make a much faster lens. I mean, but the other one was T16. So they need a lot of light. That's of course the biggest challenge with these lenses. But you usually use them in studio photography or, you know, outdoors in wildlife. So you're fine in daylight with them, or you just probably need to use additional light in most cases. Now it's a zoom lens, which is great, because very often, of course, you would have difficulty moving it. You cannot use this lens handheld, of course not, because it's always way too shaky. So you will always have to put it on a tripod or a slider or not a gimbal, but a remote head in order to position it exactly. And having the ability to zoom with this lens and adjust for, let's say you have an animal, an insect move in front of your lens. They're, of course, moving uncontrollably. Having that zoom ability will mean that you are able to adjust without moving the lens physically, which might scare it off. I've seen this with the bees and so on. So this is very, very useful, of course. And of course, just to change the distortion as well. If you can move from 18 to 28 millimeter, it already means if you go to 28, you have much less distortion than on 18. So very, very useful. This one, it's also cool, is covering full frame. I think the probe, at least the original one, I have to check if the second one, I think, was also just covering Super 35. But the first one, for sure, only covered Super 35. This one also covers full frame. And yeah, the price is very similar of the Laowa offering in this area. $3,500 for this one is very competitive, I think.
Especially it's a segment, it's a niche thing, but I think if you are doing some commercials or some nature documentaries, or that's really a great use.
We were one of the first ones to have that lens, and there was a lot of demand for the lens even here because a lot of people wanted to use it for different productions. So that's definitely something that will find its its market. This is a PL only lens, and it's nice that also like the Laowa, it's the tip is waterproof, so you can literally go into any kind of liquid if you want to film inside as well. So nice to see Laowa get some competition here, but Laowa didn't sleep, and they actually on the same day also teased a new probe lens, version 3, which is also a zoom now, and 2.3 times zoom. I think it's a very similar zoom range. It starts at 15 millimeters, so it's a little bit wider on the wide end. And Laowa already in the past had 3 different versions of this lens. They have, I reviewed already the periscope version, which has this 90-degree angle, which is quite useful. That you don't have to point straight at your subject, but it can be.
You mean so the bee is not intimidated, yeah? Because the bee thinks that you shoot elsewhere. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but and there is also a version that you can. I don't know what it's called, but you can even like twist it twice in a way. It's an even more sophisticated version of that periscope that you can angle twice, and it's quite useful. If you start using these, you understand why. Because if it's just pointing out straight, it creates all kinds of trouble mounting the camera, that you actually get to the right position. And this way, you can of course just have it on a normal slider, like in this case, and then just angle the whole thing down, and then the lens will point outwards, and you can still film your subject properly without having the camera in an awkward position, which is difficult. Yeah, so there's the same kind of thing from Laowa. It will be interesting. I think the pricing is very similar. There's 3 different versions, of course, like I said, of the Laowa one, but the prices range between $2,850 to $3,350. So very similar price range. So it will be interesting to see comparisons between those lenses. Maybe I should take that on myself. No?
As if you have nothing else to do.
But it's interesting. I think it's always good to have competition, of course, and it's now nice to have 2 different manufacturers to work in this field. Good, but let's move on to our last subject of the day.
Last topic, EVF or monitor. What would you use on your camera? This is the poll or this is the question that we asked in our poll, and almost 600 people were kind enough to answer it. And this is an interesting topic for both of us, because in a way we are a little bit of an old school shooters, meaning we like the camera either on the shoulder or hand, doesn't matter, but we're used to use an EVF, electronic viewfinder, for the sake of stability or extra stability or even exposure. And somehow I get always the feeling that the newer generation is always working with monitors, even outdoor. What they see, I don't understand, and how they expose correctly. But it's very much in fashion or fashionable to work with a monitor. So I was very curious, especially that so many cameras, the new generation cameras from Sony, FX3, FX30, and so on, and from S9 from Panasonic, XM5 from Fujifilm, and so on, those cameras don't have EVF anymore. And when we talked to some of the manufacturers asking, guys, why the Canon C70 or EOS C80 don't have an electronic viewfinder, the answer was there's no demand for that. People don't really want it. So that led us to compose this question and poll. And actually it's quite interesting because the end result is that many of those that answered, almost 50% are actually using both EVF and monitor. And I'm really wondering if the monitor is there for some positions when you are shooting and the angle of shooting actually requires you to use a monitor. It's just easier, or even a monitor for your director, assistant, soundman, or whatever. But it's encouraging to know that most people are using both and the EVF is not being ditched altogether. And then we have 30% that are using monitor only, and not so far away, like almost 24% of people are still using EVF. So if I combine everything together, it's reassuring to know that actually people are still using, or users are still using electronic viewfinders when they're filming.
Well, I guess, like we would have to look at the average age of our users, but I think, we probably cater a lot of people who are kind of established in the industry, I would say. We know from our users that means that people starting out, I think, are less prone to use an EVF. I agree, and I'm also surprised by this, but I guess one of the reasons is that if you look at gimbal work, you can't use an EVF, and a lot of people are using a lot of gimbal. And I think that's just got a lot of people used to the fact that they cannot use an EVF, and then they might not also use it for other stuff. I also don't understand, because in broad daylight, I can't work.
What do you see? You see nothing.
Well, what I do, I always have both. I always have both a viewfinder on the big camera. Yeah, when I'm working with a big camera, I even on the small one. I mean, I prefer using an A7S III over an FX3 for that reason, because I also use the viewfinder frequently, but I don't always use the viewfinder. I also look at the monitor. If I'm on a gimbal, I have to.
Did you vote?
I didn't.
Oh.
But on the big cameras, I use both. And what I do I use a high brightness monitor. So I switch the high brightness on so I can also see it in broad daylight. And that's important. If you use a normal monitor, it's very difficult. And also I prefer to see I prefer to see my log image at all times. I don't want to have a preview LUT on my footage all the time, but I want that too. So I have a preview one, and on the other one I see the log one. So I see it at the same time. That's why for me it makes sense to use both in general.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's working a little bit differently. I think the bottom line here is, and I read a lot of comments from people who actually had a chance to work with the Panasonic S9. This is the latest offering from Panasonic. Full frame camera, very small, apparently very capable, can do a lot of stuff, no EVF. And when you read a lot of the comments, many will say, I would love to buy, I'll buy this camera in a heartbeat if it had a EVF. What can I say? I mean, the other thing is that the other side of the whole story, that EVFs, first of all, there are not so many companies who are actively producing EVFs. One of them is Kinefinity, and they really have a very nice, it's called Eagle. It's a very nice EVF, but I think it's around $1,100 US. That's the minimum. It's a HDMI.
But it's basically it's good for bigger rigs. If you want to stay small with a mirrorless, it's quite big, no?
Of course, but still, well, it's a very, very elegant EVF. It's not so big. The thing is, like every EVF in the market, it also needs the powering solution behind it. So when you start to wire the stuff, HDMI, USB, and external battery, then if you use a FX3 or FX30, for example, it becomes not so comfortable. The balance is not right. Maybe if you use it on a EOS C70, C80, that's a bit better. But there are not so many offerings in the market right now, and the one that we do have are quite expensive.
Remember that Sony camera? They had this removable EVF on one of the mirrorless in the past.
Fujifilm has one, like a removable EVF.
But they don't have it
GFX
anymore. It would be so nice to just have, for example, even if it's specific to one manufacturer, if you had for $300-400, you could buy a removable OLED EVF for your mirrorless camera that you can just add on top of your FX3. That would be great.
We have been talking to companies to make something like this, and we always end up with a big smile.
They have the smart hot shoe. They could supply the power from the camera. Yeah, from the camera. They don't, like no cabling, nothing. That would be so nice.
Yeah, I mean, again, the one that has it, like Fujifilm, you don't need it because the camera already has an EVF, like the GFX line.
But the XM5?
But then that will not fit.
Oh.
I mean, let's hope that they will consider. That's how we're ending most of the conversation with the manufacturers. Of course, it's the best if it's coming from them in terms of connectivity, and if not, I hope that. Because if you remember also Sigma for the FP line of cameras, that was also a camera without an EVF, and they made like on the left-hand side, it was quite smart, the way it works. And of course, we tried also to see if it can fit to other cameras, but there was no way to do it. I mean, it has a HDMI integrated and USB-C connectivity. It's a monitor from Sigma works well with the FP line of cameras, but other than that, you can't use it for any other camera. It needs a certain handshake and power in order to operate, and obviously we couldn't make it on other cameras.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. I think that's enough for today.
Yeah, we talked a lot today, Nino.
Yeah, news. Okay, guys, see you next week on CineD Focus Check. Please like and subscribe. Like on Spotify, Apple Podcast, anywhere you get podcasts. Leave a comment on YouTube. Drop us an email at podcast@cined.com. If you have any questions or feedback, we're always happy to listen and talk about it in the next episode. And stay tuned. See you soon.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.